No, it's a well-known fact that the last person hung for murder in New Brunswick is part of a large family on the North Shore. The Richards have cross connection with LaPointe. A lot of families, New Mills, Benjamin, Jack River, Nash Creek, Lorne area. And Joe Richard was sent to the gallows for the murder of a young girl in the snow some 9 months after it occurred. Now, but before that, just a few months before, was a very, very bizarre homicide. Something you would see probably somebody in the mafia in the States do. It's the Clifford Ayles murder case. In October of 1955, a man hijacked a payroll van for the St. John Tuberculosis Hospital as the driver prepared to leave the center of the city. The robber, who entered the vehicle of Watson's Drug Store on Charlotte Street, forced the driver to drive to a remote area of nearby Simon's Parish, where he attacked the occupants. The driver, Alison Graves, was stabbed 16 times and passed away. His passenger, hospital business manager Harold Cunningham, was shot in the head from behind and critically wounded. Cunningham, who had ran the payroll run for nearly 40 years, did not witness the stabbing of Graves as he was attacked first, but slipping in and out of consciousness, he heard the other man screaming from the rear of the van. Later, he found his co-worker's body on the ground outside. The robbery netted more than $11,000 in cash and bonds. Left for dead, Cunningham survived and became the chief witness for the prosecution. He identified the suspect as Clifford Ayles, a 25-year-old man from the Atholville region. Now, Ayles had been a patient at the hospital in 1953 and 1954. Following an extensive manhunt, the suspect was arrested in a tavern, of all places, Phoenix, Arizona, in December, where he had been living in motels. After extradition proceedings, he was returned by airplane to New Brunswick, where he faced trial for murder. Now, found guilty in June 1956 and sentenced to be hanged, there was appeals to the Appeal Division of the Supreme Court of New Brunswick and to the Supreme Court of Canada, which proved fruitless, and the federal cabinet refused to commute the sentence to life in penitentiary. Now, this is a very interesting article, which I think is from the St. John Daily, could be the Telegraph Journal. It was a very good article, and we're quoting directly. Preparing, move to reopen case turned down by Supreme Court. Prisoner receives news without show of emotion. The gallows on which St. John last hanging was carried out in 1947 is being prepared for the scheduled November 6th execution of 26-year-old Clifford Edward Ayles of Atholville. Yesterday, the Atholville natives next to the last avenue escaped from the noose was cut off when the Supreme Court of Canada turned down a bid to reopen his case. He can only be saved now by federal cabinet intervention, which of course was not forthcoming. Ayles has been confined to a cell at the county jail since last June, when he was convicted of the knife slaying of St. John Tuberculosis Hospital driver Alison Graves during a $11,000 payroll robbery. At the jail yesterday, he was reported to have showed no sign of emotion when told of a Supreme Court decision by Very Reverend Dr. J.M. Gallagher, Chancellor of the Diocese. Jail officials described the tall, dark-haired Ayles as composed and resigned to his fate. Although the hanging of Ayles is a job of Sheriff T.E. Desmond, is expected to follow what has become almost a custom and delegate the authority to a pro-hangman. Sheriff Desmond was not available this morning for a statement. Ayles' mother was reported to have broken down in her Atholville home last night, which referred to her the news that the Supreme Court of Canada had turned down the bid of defense counsel to reopen the case. Now, she was comforted by her husband, who then drove the 300 miles to St. John. He arrived here shortly before noon and went immediately to the county jail. At noon, he had Dr. Gallagher, who were closeted with Ayles in his cell. The start of a list of witnesses, as required by law, was being prepared this morning for the hanging. It will include the prison doctor, his assistant, the coroner, a priest, the sheriff, and several attendants in the case of collapse of the prisoner. Under execution procedure, a coroner's jury will be impaneled and will sit as soon as the prisoner is officially pronounced dead. This will determine cause of death. No postmortem is expected to be performed. The Supreme Court refusal to grant leave to appeal the murder conviction was announced from the bench at Ottawa after argument was presented by Ayles' counsel, E.C. Atkinson QC of Frankton. Mr. Atkinson raised 5 points of law and claimed the New Brunswick Court of Appeal erred in upholding the conviction. The application was heard by Justices I.C. Rand, C.H. Locke, J.R. Cartwright, Gerald Foto, and Henry G. Nolan. Now, what makes the case quite interesting, ladies and gentlemen, all procedures were followed. There was no execution in St. John but a decade before. But the cruelty of the incident really shocked a lot of people. Now, if anybody knows people from the North Shore, generally we're hardworking people, but we're not really robbers like this. There was some question if Ayles was in his right mind when that occurred, because again, he was a patient in the hospital there for a couple of years. Now, maybe he scoped it out previously, but I think $11,000 in cash and bonds, no offense, I'm going to cash in the bonds. So, I mean, but it was a big, that was a big haul for the time, like $50,000 now. Now, when found guilty in June 56, he was sentenced to be hanged. Appeals to the Appeal Division of the Supreme Court of New Brunswick and the Supreme Court of Canada proved fruitless, and the federal cabinet refused to commute the sentence to life in penitentiary. I think this was under, thinking Diefenbaker? I could be wrong here. I don't think it was Laurier, but I think it was Diefenbaker. November 56, Ayles reported Ayles went to the gallows calmly. The task was carried out in St. John County Jail by an executioner from Quebec, which was the way at the time. Now, again, Clifford Ayles was the last person to be hung in St. John, and Joe Richard, convicted of the murder and sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl, was the last person executed in New Brunswick. Now, my uncle Sammy, who I've been, he's updated me on the case for many years. He believes that Richard may have had an accomplice that brought him to the site where the young girl was murdered. I'm not going to go into particulars of the case. So there's no indication right now that Joe Richard acted alone, but how could he get there? At middle of winter, he couldn't walk. But Ayles, I think, with those two victims in the car, he was acting alone. Now, Richard was hung at a Rescue County Jail in Dalhousie in late 57 after 2 trials. Now, after 62, in response again, mostly to the Stephen Truscott case, where a teenager was convicted of murder he did not commit and spent several years in jail, suffering under that miscarriage of justice, all executions to Canada effectively ceased, but capital punishment was not removed from the Canadian Criminal Code until 1976. So just for our American listeners, because we go under British common law, the only way you can be executed in Canada is by hanging. There is no execution. There's no guillotine like by France. If it does come back, no lethal injection. That's a U.S. Jurisdiction under state law. So I mean, Clifford Ayles and Joe Richard, 2 years of each other. No wonder people were kind of scared for the people in North Shore for a while. This was well before, 3+ decades before Alan Legier. So I don't know if Alan Legier had saw the case and basically said, not say motivated by it, but it's a pretty freaky. And the Ayles and Richard family, they're well known for hard working, some nice people in the family, but it takes one bad apple to spoil the whole bunch. So that's the story of Clifford Ayles from Atholville, the last person to be hung for murder in St. John. If you like what you're doing here, we're a true crime podcast in New Brunswick. Let us know in the like, comment, subscribe, or share.